Hey everyone, it's the Koopa Man. A while ago I made a video about how video games, particularly Western games, have problems with optimization. Most of this video was a criticism of the, quote, cloud version of games put on the Nintendo Switch. And while I do stand on what I said on that video, we're probably going to see a lot more cloud games on the Nintendo Switch too as well, mark my words. Still, there is a far greater problem with optimization in games than what I discussed in that video, and it all comes down to this meme. In today's age of primarily PC-based gaming, as well as the current consoles being built like PCs more than consoles, game file sizes are getting larger and larger, all in the name of one thing: the most realistic, high-fidelity graphics and textures. Game devs nowadays all have the goal of making their games look immersive and just like it was real, to the point that they do ridiculous things like dedicate engines and shaders for individual bubbles in a beer bottle to appear as real as possible. You think I'm joking? Grand Theft Auto 6 is doing just that. See? There comes to a point where you have to realize that people dedicated time and resource to this instead of putting it literally anywhere else. Fixing existing bugs in the game, which being an open world game, it's bound to have more than a few, tightening up the story, having dinner with their family, giving their mother that long overdue phone call to tell her that they love her, playing catch in the park with little Jimmy. Instead, that time is dedicated to making beer bubbles look real. And it's likely going to be what causes GTA 6 to be more than 300 gigabytes file size at launch. Though I'd be lying if I said that the idea of a, quote, realistic video game was a new trend. In fact, it dates back a good ways. So much so that in the game Penn and Teller's Smoke and Mirrors, a sort of non-game on the Sega CD with a series of little video pranks and gags and gimmicks. Come to think of it, I think Monty Python did something similar. Anyway, besides the point. Within this collection was a game called Desert Bus, which opened with Penn making fun of the idea of realism in video games. And the game itself exists to lampoon on that concept. For those who have never heard of Desert Bus before, the game is this. Yep. Here's the game. Just you. Driving a bus. In a featureless desert. For 8 hours. You can honk the horn, but it doesn't do anything. You can't pause the game because real life doesn't have a pause button. If you walk away from the bus, it gets caught in the sand and has to be towed back to start. This is what the game was. A bland, featureless desert. Alright, that's enough of this. Gonzalez cut to the truck sim footage. Yeah, almost like how Yankee Doodle got adopted by the Continental Forces. He didn't care that the song was making fun of them. Years after Desert Bus was made, the Truck Simulator franchise came into being with mostly the same concept. And it wore it like a badge of honor. Granted, Truck Simulator is a fairly well-optimized game, the file size of the base game of American Truck Sim being only 25 gigabytes, with the full experience with all the add-ons being roughly 61 gigabytes. Still a bit excessive, but a far cry from from the usual 100 to 200 gigabyte mark most games nowadays have. And honestly, who wants to play a game about driving for 8 hours in the desert anyway? Oh goody, my thumbnail artist is now mad at me. Back on point. This was a thing all the way back on the Sega CD, but it hasn't stopped being a thing between then and now. In fact, this was the entire criticism that so-called fans had for the announcement of the GameCube classic, The Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker. For context, at Space World 2000, Nintendo showed off a Zelda tech demo of Link and Ganondorf crossing swords in their Ocarina of Time art style. It was very obvious to anyone with above room temperature IQ that it was just a tech demo, but it got people excited for the realistic looking GameCube graphics and what it could do for the Zelda series. Cut to August 2001 when Nintendo showed off their newest Legend of Zelda title, called Wind Waker, and it was made in a cel-shaded cartoon style. This got the fake fans outraged. How dare they make Zelda all kitty looking? Only an infant would want to play this Zelda game.
That's for babies. That's for babies. Babies. For babies. That's for babies. That's for... Oh, I like these.
Never mind that the game had some of the darkest story beats in the series until that point. Because the game didn't go for a realistic art style, it was considered to be terrible by these people. So the next main entry in the series course corrected and we got The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess, with a more realistic art style and darker story. Now, while I'm a fan of both games, it has to be said that one of them holds up way more than the other. Wind Waker's art style was actually to its benefit as it allowed it to escape the uncanny valley effect of some of Twilight Princess's character designs had. Looking at you, Postman. And when the games got ported to the Wii U as HD remasters, Twilight Princess had a significant number of texture and graphical updates to make it look far less uncanny valley, while Wind Waker got a new lighting engine. And that was about it graphically. Yeah, well, this trend of realistic game demands isn't new, neither is the mockery of it, as seen with Desert Bus. In fact, take a look at this video.
And also added an AI system to it, so we have fish move out of the way when you get close to them.
The context? Call of Duty Ghosts was advertising a script in the game that allowed the fish to behave realistically, something that Mario 64 already did many years earlier with more rudimentary hardware and coding. For the sake of reference, Call of Duty Ghosts has a file size of 40 gigabytes, which was a lot for when it was released back on the PlayStation 3. And Mario 64 comes up to 8 megabytes. Mega, not giga. It would take 5,000 Mario 64s to be equal in file size to the initial base game of Ghosts before patches and DLC. And what would the majority of that file size be? Textures. HD textures to make the game look as real as possible. Some of you may remember in one of my videos, I made a joke about how in Mortal Kombat 1, they had to render the wind dynamic engine, HD textures, and depth of field view for a single blade of grass miles away in the distance on one of the stages in the 2D fighter game where you're not even going to go to that part of the stage. A blade of grass that one would never even remotely see in full view outside of camera hacking. Well, it turns out that wasn't an exaggeration, it seems. Today's game devs, at least the ones in the West, have been so obsessed with this kind of immersion and realism, they forgot, or don't care, that all this crap costs resources on the system running the game. And more than that, nobody will ever see it except for the extremely autistic. And it isn't like we even need to be so hyper-focused on this stuff anymore. Have a look at this image. We have reached a point in video game graphics where adding the amount of triangles in a polygonal game model by a factor of 10 would no longer increase the visual fidelity. Sure, it's all well and good for the artists on the dev team to flex their muscles by developing realistic looking nose and ear hair, or for the programmers to make a realistic system which toenails decompose, but they'd be literally the only ones that get any enjoyment out of it. The actual consumer, the gamer, the vast majority of them would not notice or even remotely care. It'd just be more data they need to begrudgingly delete off their hard drive, or, more realistically, more excuses not to buy the game as the file size is just too damn big for their liking. To put a neat bow on this, let me show you guys the intro to Desert Bus. And remember, this was Penn and Teller lampooning the idea of realistic driving games.
You've played simulators before. We all have. Tanks, planes, race cars, submarines, hedgehogs. Heck, Absolutes even put out a few of them themselves. But let's face it, how many of us are ever actually going to use these valuable skills in our everyday lives? Sure, I guess there's a chance you'll be on a major commercial airliner and have to take over for an unconscious pilot, or maybe after all those years of expensive schooling your parents worked so hard to put you through, you'll decide to chuck it all to enter the Indianapolis 500. It could happen. But for most of us, the chances are slim to none. Teller and I want to prepare you for the real world. We want to show you what life is really like. Desert Bus is the first in our line of what we like to call Vera simulators, games stupefyingly like reality. 360 miles from Tucson, AZ to Las Vegas, NV. 45 miles per hour maximum. Teller! 8 hours if you do it right. Don't let go of the controller and watch that little pull to the right. It's not glamorous. It's not pretty. It's not exciting. It's real. Oh, and check your manual for details on our Desert Bus Contest. Wow. Just watching Teller race through that dry, sandy, endless desert sure does leave me parched. Hey, oh, don't go to the controller. You don't want 4 hours of hard driving to go right down the drain, do you? No. Besides, I wouldn't drink too much water if I were you. It's 200 miles to the next rest area. Desert Bus.
There comes a point where you gotta ask why. Why would you want there to be bubbles in the beer in the video game? Why would you want there to be nose hairs in the NPC models? What is the point for there to be a toenail decaying script? Or for every blade of grass to be extraneously and individually detailed to be unique if it's 200 miles away in a 2D fighting game stage? Who is this stuff even for? Well, it's certainly not for the gamers and consumers. Am I saying that Western game devs are selfish artistes, forcing their Xerox degrees down our throats in the name of proving that they aren't the little insignificant nothings on a credit scene that we don't even watch, the way that web designers force their new UI updates down our throats with every major web service update? Maybe. It's either that or it's one big money laundering scheme. But regardless, we know what the results are. Ballooning budgets and file sizes, but diminishing returns on investments when games don't meet the demands, and a slow and steady road to the next big video game crash. Law of conservation of detail, otherwise known as Chekhov's guns, dictates that you shouldn't overload your audience with unnecessary details. If a gun is said to be hanging on the wall in the first chapter, it needs to be used by the fourth or fifth, otherwise it doesn't need to be there. This same logic can be applied to video game development, and it's a law that's unfortunately been ignored. But time will tell when, not if, when ignoring this law will bite the industry in the butt. There has already been major pushback on the idea of quadruple A games, so it's only a matter of time. But until then, this has been the Koopa Man. If you like this video and you want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe, and have a look at my channel as there are a number of videos you may like as well. Be sure to comment as well, as I'd love to hear your frustrations with the focus on realism causing games to be more expensive and more taxing on your hard drive. And until next time, game on.